Hello everyone and welcome to my channel. Today we're going to be painting up a Deamon prince, but for me I'm going to be painting him up as a Nurgle Deamon prince with wings. I assembled the model up to the point where we get in the way of painting. The wings are separate. The wings are fully assembled. One of them comes in two pieces. The body is fully assembled, but the head is separate. The arms are together, but his hands are not. His weapon is out. His belt buckle is separate. His loincloth is separate. His shoulder pads are separate. And the array of skulls that he keeps is separate, as well as he has like these tubes and stuff that come out of his armor. Those are separate. Apart from that, everything else is assembled. And here we have all the paints, tools and stuff we used for this project. Some you won't see me use was just used in the background or for for the base. Didn't really feature that. And yeah, I'm moving on to the model. Alright, first is pre-coating. With Eshin Grey, Pallid Witch Flesh, and White Scar White with the help of an airbrush, we're going to paint the model. Basically, cover the underside in Eshin Grey, and airbrush from up above Pallid Witch Flesh to create the highlights and shadows. Then, with White Scar White, we're going to dry brush. Now, however, we're not going to dry brush the entire thing. It's not really needed, so we're going to dry brush his skin, his feet, his face, his neck, back, and stuff like that. His arms, just to hit the parts that have skin, as well as his wings, especially his wings. Heavy focus on the wings. And apart from that, there really is nothing else. I don't need to dry brush his armor or the skulls or anything like that. Alright, with Elysian Green in my very depleted Lamian medium, we're going to paint the skin. So essentially, I mix Elysian Green with Lamian medium till it becomes like a wash, and apply it all over. And this shows the undercoating and dry brushing that I've done. And as for the wings, I paint the non-membrane parts of the wings with this color. And now with Krieg Khaki and Lamian Medium, we're going to paint the membranes on the wings. So I basically create another wash with Krieg Khaki and Lamian Medium, and a little bit of water to help it flow better, and apply it onto the membranes. Now, one thing I will note is that this Krieg Khaki reacted a little weirdly, turning into a wash. So in the end, I had to apply 2 coats of this because it wasn't as well, or didn't cover as well. So I had to apply 2 coats to get it solid in. Now, since we're using washes heavily first, we want as bright as possible because we're only going to really darken the model. Alright, now with Burnt Umber and some Mineral Spirits to dilute it, we're actually not going to make a wash. We're going to make a paste, and we're going to paint it all over the wings in its entirety, and like the back part of his tail. And then once we apply it, we let it sit for a little bit, like 10 minutes to 15 at most, and then we start wiping off. We do a big thick layer of wiping to remove the vast majority. Then we go back again with a clean sponge, or we cut off the excess sponge and so the underside is clean. And we do a more thorough wipe, trying to dig out a lot more from the recesses and stuff. It'll still be there, but we don't want like a huge pitch, like a whole area flooded with this. And here's a before and after in the end. I then make a wash out of the burnt umber by adding a lot more mineral spirits, and then I apply this all over the rest of his body and skin. And then once that dries, once it's like placed there, I then wipe it all off with, of course, the sponge. And for his membranes and in some more upper raised areas, what I did is I took a brush and loaded it up with mineral spirits. I just basically like wiped, sanded it smooth, and this method cleared up a lot more of the mineral spirits and dug out a lot of the really entrenched excess oil paint that was in the recesses. This is more of an artsy thing. You have to go back and forth, and it's more of like you working with clay. You're adding, you're subtracting, you're moving things around. That's what is happening here. Now with Elysian Green, Nurgle Green, and Krieg Khaki, we're going to fix the wings. Now, if this was like a speed paint and it wasn't an important character, we could just skip this step really, but we want more detail, more character in there. So with Elysian Green, I'm going to repaint basically 80 to 90% of, or more like around 50% of all the upper raised areas highlights of the wings, and then I'm going to do a fine line of Nurgle Green on all the edges, and a bunch of straight lines on his like bones between the membranes. I don't know what these are, but this is used for highlighting. And then with Krieg Khaki, I paint straight lines on all the ridges and hills that his membrane has to further highlight them. Now these are already highlighted from the pre-coating, but this will bring it to the next level. Alright, so with Doombull Brown, we're going to take the airbrush and we're going to apply some color to the wings. So there's a lot of parts where the wings are literally ripped apart or ripped off, and this is going to add a lot more color and flavor to the wings because they look really bad. They just look pale, white ghost kind of stuff, so this is going to add some color and character to them. Alright, now with Agrax Earthshade, we're going to use this as a darkener. So we're going to put it in the airbrush and we're going to lightly apply it. So basically you spray it for a little bit and then let pure air go through and it dries it. And we do this repeatedly over an area, and this will slowly darken the color. Well, it'll darken it because it's a darker color Agrax Earthshade. We're going to apply it to his tail to get a better color flow to make it darker at the tip. We're also going to apply it to his like armpits or like his sides and stuff where there's more shadows and stuff, and wherever we want to darken places. Alright, with Agrax Earthshade and Lamian Medium, we're going to add some more depth onto the wings. So the Lamian Medium is mixed with a little bit of Lamian Medium. It's mixing with Agrax Earthshade because Agrax Earthshade on its own will have like a marbling effect if you place it, and the Lamian Medium will make it smooth. The color will be smooth. And we're just going to apply this again into the recesses for a more controlled effort into places, just to add some more depth and shadow into basically the space where the membranes meet the wings. Alright, now with Steel Legion Trap, Baneblade Brown, Carrickstone, and Screaming Skull, and I bring in Agrax Earthshade into this later because it wasn't good enough. I'm going to do the nails. Now he has horns on his head, nails coming out of his wings, or I don't know what those would be called, and his toenails, he has a bunch of horns everywhere. First color, Steel Legion Drab. And basically what I do is Steel Legion Drab, then Baneblade Brown covering like 80 to 90% of it, then lines of Carrack Stone, a north, south, east, west line on each of the big horns, and then Screaming Skull on the tip and lines halfway up each horn. That's generally how it goes, the basic ideas. But with Agrax Earthshade, I apply a layer of this after the Steel Legion Drab onto his head horns. These ones have to be much more detailed because there's a lot more detail and it's a focal point of, well, focus. Then we re-highlight all the thing with Steel Legion Drab. Then we re-highlight with Baneblade Brown covering like 80 to 90% of his main horns. Then we do light layers and lines of Carrack Stone towards the upper half of his head horn, and then the very tips of it was Screaming Skull. And he has all sorts of different horns, so nails coming out of his wings, basically Steel Legion Drab, Baneblade Brown covering most of it, lines of Carrack Stone, and then fine lines of Screaming Skull towards the tip. That's essentially all we do. And just a lot of different horns here and there, and we just try to make them look right. Alright, with Death Corpse Drab, Castellan Green, Lauren Forest, and Elysian Green, we're going to paint his shoulder pads. So I'm painting him as if he was a Death Guard Legionnaire who ascended to being a Daemon Prince. So his armor is going to maintain the same colors as his old Legion. So we're going to start with the darkest color, Death Corpse Drab, all over. Then we're going to do highlight covering like 90% of it with Castellan Green, and then Lauren Forest covering like 80 to 90% of the Castellan Green. And then with Elysian Green, I actually am going to try something. So I water it down heavily to try to get it thin, and then I use it as highlights and I paint the fine lines all throughout, like the sharp edges of things here and there. However, it's a little hard to control, and probably you would do better diluting it with Lamian medium to maintain its viscosity and then just add a little bit of water in there, and you would have gotten a much more thinner Elysian green, so you can do softer highlight and then build layers to make them sharper. Alright then, with Ushabti Bone and Wraith Bone, I'm going to paint his armor. So first off, I start off with Ushabti Bone and I paint basically all the flat plates of his armor plate, including the one on his arm, his right arm specifically. I do a little bit of blend with it to make it blend in with the armor. However, I decide that I'm going to have to change my plans. So I take burnt sienna, I turn it into a wash and apply it all over. And a light wash, and then I wipe it, of course. After that, and once it's dried, very sure it's dried, I then apply Ushabti Bone again, re-covering, re-highlighting pretty much everything. And then I take Wraith Bone and I do edge highlights on like his back tail plates, as well as drawing lines on the most raised, more prominent areas of his armor plates, as well as like filling in a bit of the center of his chest plates, the upper center pieces of each of his chest plates, and also making sure that the burnt sienna is like filling in the space between his flat armor plates and the metal filigree work on his chest plate and stuff like that. Alright, with Castellan Green, Lamian Medium, Lauren Forest, and Elysian Green, we're going to paint his, loincloth thingy. So first, I start off with the Castellan Green and Lamian Medium wash and cover the whole thing. Even if I wasn't going to use it fully as a wash, it's also good to like show where the light lines are to help sort of be as a guide for painting. And then I just went with Lauren Forest and basically filled in like 90% of it, and Castellan Green was just the dark side. And then what I did was did a sort of a one-to-one mix of Lauren Forest and Elysian Green, and I wanted to add some detail. So I applied it on all the edges and lines on the cloth, and then I painted thin straight lines across the cloth all over, and then up and down, spaced out a bit. And then with pure Elysian Green, I tried to do the same thing, either not to fill in, but to be on top of each line, if you can get what I mean. So all the horizontal lines, the top half is covered in Elysian Green to make it look like it's a highlighted light thing, so like some texture on the cloth and stuff like that, and some filling in the horizontal lines, or the vertical lines as well. And then I create this little cloth that has a little bit of like texture, a little more character to it. It actually didn't take as long as you'd think. Alright, with Lamian Medium, Magos Purple, Emperor's Children, Ballad Witchflesh, we're going to paint his hat. So we start off with the base layer of Emperor's Children. Then we're going to apply Magos Purple all over. Now it's mixed with a little bit of Lamian Medium, but that is mostly just to make sure the paint is smooth and consistent. So just a little bit of Lamian Medium in with the Magos Purple, and we apply a coat of that. Or maybe two. And then we re-highlight with Emperor's Children all over all the edges, stuff like that. Maybe make some lines and stuff to make things interesting. Re-highlight again. Highlight again, or reapply Magos Purple, Lamian Medium to add more depth. This is a back and forth, highlighting, adding dark with Magos Purple, adding depth there, then rehighlighting as needed. And when you think you're about right, you can apply Pallid Witch Flesh mixed in with some Emperor's Children and do as a very fine highlight on the most raised and most prominent edges and stuff. And so this is more of a back and forth of color, adding depth, highlighting, adding depth, highlighting, adding depth, until you got like the right ratio that you like. Alright then, with Skeleton Horde Contrast, Steel Legion Drab, Carrick Stone, and Pallid Witch Flesh, I'm going to paint his teeth and a little bit of his eyes. So with Steel Legion Drab, I'm going to apply it to his teeth, gums, and the area around his eye to add like shading. Then with Skeleton Horde Contrast, I'm going to apply it all over to add much more dark. Now, what I did then was did straight lines of Steel Legion Drab on all his teeth, then a Carrick Stone on the halfway up his teeth, and then Pallid Witch Flesh on the tips. I should not have done this because the teeth are so small, you really can't see the transition of color that well. So what I should have done is, after applying the Skeleton Horde Contrast and making it dark, I should have just went straight to Carrick Stone, painting the teeth, and then Pallid Witch Flesh on the very tips of the teeth. It would have been more obvious. His teeth would stand out better. Alright then, with Guilliman Flesh, Eshin Grey, and Dawnstone, I'm going to try to paint his eyes. So I apply Guilliman Flesh around his eye and area so it fills in and adds some more depth and shadow into there. And then I applied Eshin Grey onto his eyeballs, filling them out entirely, and then I highlight with Dawnstone. This was a waste, as the eyes are so tiny you can't really see the transition. I should have just painted the eye black and then just put a gray dot in the center, and that would have stood out and been obvious. I then take this very bright Administratum Gray and then put a tiny dot of it on each of his eyeballs in order to make it stand out more. It somewhat worked. I needed a higher transition. I should have gone with dark black to this. Alright, with Cadian Flesh Tone, Magos Purple, Guilliman Flesh, and Pallid Witch Flesh, we're going to paint his tongue. So I'm going to paint the whole thing with Cadian Flesh Tone. I'm going to add a layer of Magos Purple, and then re-highlight like 95% of the tongue with Cadian Flesh Tone. Reapply Magos Purple, re-highlight just a little less. Highlight again, add some Magos Purple, add Guilliman Flesh to redden the tongue a bit. Highlight again, maybe add some purple. This is an artistic thing of going back and forth. And then finally do a sort of one-to-one mix of Cadian and Pallid Witch Flesh on the most raised areas of his tongue and stuff. and you can add Magos or Guilliman flesh after to change the overall color of the tongue, essentially. But make sure it doesn't pool in the center, so his tongue has like a little ravine there, and you want to make sure that really doesn't fill up, otherwise it's going to be noticeably much darker than everything else. So alright, with Ushabti Bone, Skeleton Horde Contrast, my very depleted Lamian Medium, and Screaming Skull, we're going to paint all the skulls. So basically, we're going to give him a base layer of Ushabti Bone, all over. Then we're going to do a mix of Skeleton Horde Contrast with a little bit of Lamian Medium in it to smooth out the paint. Then we're going to apply this all over all the skulls, maybe twice, just to get a good contrast layer. It depends on how much Lamian Medium you mix in and stuff, but I wanted it darker. And then I take Ushabti Bone and I paint like 80 to 90% of each of the skulls. Straight lines on the eyes, mouth, and stuff like that, jaw lines, stuff like that, and little feathering on the top of their skulls and stuff. And then with Screaming Skull, I re-highlight very thin lines on basically everything I just did with Ushabti Bone again, but much less, and just focusing on the more raised areas and sharp lines. And that is the bones. Alright, with Black Templar Contrast Paint, Guilliman Flesh Contrast Paint, and Thondium Brown, we're just going to do some quick little details on the skulls. So, Black Templar, then one of them has like some hair. Guilliman Flesh, another one of them has some hair. And Thondium Brown, some of them are tied together with strings. I'm going to assume leather, and so I paint that leather. And that's it. Oh, and then at the very end I notice that one of the heads is not a skull, it is a face. So I take Plague Bearer's flesh and just apply a little bit on it to make it sickly green. That's it. Alright, with Eshin Grey, Dawnstone, Administrative Grey, and I do pick this up later, Agrax Earthshade, we're going to paint the stone he's standing on. So we paint the whole thing Eshin Grey. And it was at this moment I realized that there's a bunch of skulls on the stone, and I did not notice them when I painted the skulls, so I go back and paint them back later. Then with Dawnstone, essentially what we're going to do is like a dry brush / overbrush, basically covering like 80 to 90% of it with Dawnstone, but the Eshin Greys and the cracks. Then with Administrative Grey, we're going to do a light dry brushing, overbrushing on like the upper halves of each stone, trying to get like a grainy, like you can see the little hairs, lines of hair from the brushes on there to add some randomness. And then with the Administrative Grey, we will then take a proper brush and we will paint the edges of each of the stones and stuff and just paint the lines, and this will like straighten out the abstract brushing we just did on it. And of course Agrax Earthshade to add color into it, just to add a little more. And that's it. Alright, with Doombull Brown, Thondia Brown, and I don't show it here, but I actually get XV88 as well. And none of these other gray colors, because I had a vision change of how I want this to look as I was doing it. So we're painting the hooves, his two hooves. So we're going to start off with Doombull Brown, painting his entire hooves Doombull Brown. Then we're going to take Thondia Brown and we're going to water this down a lot. Maybe a little bit of Lamian, I don't recall, but basically it was basically a wash, a super wash, and we just applied it all over. Then I re-highlighted all the edges and a bunch of straight lines with Doombull Brown. Then we re-highlighted with Thondia again. On the like bottom 3/4, re-highlighted with Doombull Brown again, along the lines and edges, the major ones, and then we applied another layer of this halfway down. Then we re-highlighted all the edges and lines and stuff with Doombull, and then we did this on the last fourth of the model, or the hooves, and this created a gradient of going from bright to dark. And then once that was done, I took XV88 and I mixed it in with some of the Doombull Brown and highlighted everything and made like lines and stuff for here. Then I added more XV88, re-highlighted thinner lines, and then finally I did pure XV88, very thin lines on the most raised areas and stuff like that, and edges and stuff, and it looks pretty good. Alright, with Mornfang Brown, Agrax Earthshade, and XV88, we're going to paint these leather straps he has, and his sword handle. So we're going to paint them all with Mournfang Brown as a base, but it's watered down enough so that it allows some of the undercoating to show through, especially on his sword handle. And then once that dries, I apply Agrax Earthshade onto both, especially his handle, and then we just leave that. No more painting the handle, so it's all done already. So then we do Mournfang Brown, highlighting the edges, and we paint thin lines in between the leather, just to add some texture. And then we do the same thing with watered down XV88 on the very edges of the straps and stuff, as well as some thin lines throughout to add some character and texture to them. And yeah, that's it. And now with Corvus Black and nothing else, I water this down a bit, and then I apply this onto all the tubes that he has on his body and that are not attached. And because of the dry brushing and the pre-coating step, they naturally highlight. The Corvus Black gives way to some of the more pronounced areas, and I was like, okay, this looks good enough. Alright, with Agrax Earthshade, Corn Red, Evil Sun Scarlet, and Wild Rider Red, we're gonna paint the eyes that he has on his shoulder blades. So we're gonna start with Agrax Earthshade, and with some quality camera angles, apply this to darken his shoulder pads and add like a layer of dark between his metal filigree. Then with Corn Red, we're gonna fill in the eyes. Then with Evil Sun Scarlet, we're gonna fill in the like 3/4 of his eye, each eye. And then with Wild Rider Red, we're gonna paint like the bottom half, quarter, third of each of the eyes. And now with Abaddon Black, Corvus Black, Eshin Grey, Dawnstone, and Administrative Grey, we're going to paint his sword. So I'm going to try something with this. So with Abaddon Black, I paint his whole sword this. Then with an airbrush, I try to do a transition color on like these pointy parts, the front tip of the sword, and the pointy parts that come out, to try to paint the area around there. However, this was a waste of time, so I just airbrushed the whole thing because Abaddon Black really didn't cut it, so you could have just used Corvus Black and paint the whole thing that. Then I used Eshin Grey, and I did the airbrushing around the tip and the two other spots to sort of go from dark to light. Then did the same thing again with Dawnstone, but a thinner airbrushing coat of this in the places that I applied Eshin Grey. And then with Administrative Grey, I then painted fine lines on all the edges of his blade, and the edges that are made into the sword. Like there's a gap. I know there's an official name for this, but I can't for the life of me remember what it is. The groove in the center, the edges on there. And basically what I do know is that for whatever mess of colors you do, like with airbrushing or whatever, if you paint like straight lines around it and stuff, it all of a sudden like adds order to what you've painted, and all of a sudden it looks sharp and stuff. So weird effect. And it was a good first try. I probably should have done a little bit more. I've done Administrative Grey with the airbrush as well, just a very thin line of it for better transition, and then a strong thin line with a paint brush in the very, very center to add a focal point for light, and maybe focus. Alright, with Black Templar Contrast Paint, Screaming Skull, Evil Sun Scarlet, and Wild Rider Red, I paint the symbols on his sword. So I paint the groove with Black Templar Contrast to make it look different. Then I add Screaming Skull into all the symbols. This was a waste. I shouldn't have done this now. I should have done it later. Then take Evil Sun Scarlet and dry brush onto the symbols to like have them catch. I do heavy dry brushing. Then with Wild Rider Red, do some light dry brushing and maybe some painting on the edges of the symbols as best you can. Some of these are so small that just doing a lighter dry brush will be enough, because I don't have the skill to paint some of these ridiculously tiny little things properly. And then I went back with Screaming Skull, watered down so that it would easily flow off the brush, and I let it flow into all the symbols and stuff, and it looked good. Alright, I'm going to try something. So with Thondia Brown, Doombull Brown, and Ryza Rust, we're going to paint essentially the metal. So he has his chains, and he has these little things dangling from his wings. We're going to paint them all with Thondia Brown as a dark brown. Then we're going to randomly put splotches of Doom Bowl brown scattered throughout, covering like 50 to 60, 75% at most of the Thondia brown. Then with Riser Rust, we're going to apply light layers of like dry brushing on it to get it to pick on some areas. We're also going to paint it more directly onto some areas to make it more concentrated. Don't forget his like left hand claws and stuff like that. And this is the precursor for metal, so I want like this dark red rusted metal. And so I wanted to start with this and then move on. Also, sorry about some of the camera angles. This happens sometimes for me, sorry. Alright, all non-metals are painted. So we're going to seal them in with AK Interactive Ultra Matte Varnish and paint everything with this. Alright, with Vallejo acrylic colors, the exhaust manifold and copper. Exhaust manifold is just basically a dark metal, and copper is like, well, copper. So basically we're going to take the exhaust manifold and we're going to paint all the exposed metal pieces on the wires that are on him, the tubes. And we're going to do light dry brushing on all the stuff we just painted, the brown with the Riser Rust and stuff. And just pick out some of the edges and stuff here and there very lightly, and so that it'll look like there's metal still in there. You ever seen like a super rusted piece of metal? There's still parts of it that you can still see the metal underneath, but the rest has like other gunk on it. That's what I'm going for here. And then finally, one of the skulls he has like this jewelry stuff, so I was going to paint it copper, as well as he has a bunch of metal rings all throughout his wings, and so I just paint those copper as well. Alright then, with Warplock Bronze, Balthazar Gold, and Runelord Brass, we're going to paint his metal. I don't use Liberator Gold. In the end, it stood out too much. So basically what I'm going to do is I'm going to take Balthazar Gold and paint all the filigree on his armor and stuff like that with this. I'm going to start with the medium color. Then I'm going to take Warplock Bronze, the dark color, and I'm going to carefully apply it in all the recesses, edges, and stuff like that to create the dark, essentially. Then with Runelord Brass, I'm going to take that and basically highlight all the edges and everything else, painting straight lines on the edges and feathering in edges or on some places. And as well as his shoulder pads, painting the edges and then feathering in to add some transitional color and some highlights and stuff like that. I then decide this isn't enough, so with Agrax Earthshade mixed with a little bit of Lamian Medium to make it work better. It's probably actually this is a 1-to-1-ish, and a little bit of water. I then apply it all over all the metal I just painted, add some extra shadow and add some extra final depth to it. Alright, with Nihilok Oxide, Skeleton Horde Contrast mixed with some Lamian Medium to make it flow better, I'm going to add a little bit of character. So with the Oxide color, I'm going to apply this to all the copper that he has on his jewelry, his wings, and stuff like that. Just little dots here and there to add a little extra something. And then the Skeleton Horde Contrast mixed with Lamian Medium, I'm going to apply this on all the metal, exposed metal, silver stuff from his ports and stuff, just to like yellow it a little bit so that it's not super shiny on a Nurgle model. And then assembly. I assemble the entirety of the model together, one at a time, super glue mostly. I'm tired of using model glue, that just keeps screwing me over. One thing though is I accidentally add the belt buckle before the loincloth, and then I have to rip off the belt buckle, which didn't adhere too well because it didn't have an actual good hold. So I applied the loincloth and then the belt buckle over. And apart from that, it worked pretty well. And then I assemble him onto a base, which is basically the same Nurgle bases I've always made, but with a little bit of moss on it and a little bit of texture on it as well. This was an experiment. Maybe in the future I'll show how it's done. And done. 8 out of 10 for my work. I don't know, I feel like I was making trying to make the most of it because I just didn't like the way he was turning out. And so I feel dissatisfied with him. So 8 out of 10 for me. Now a few notes. The wings I feel like a bit redundant. The oils I applied did help a lot with the joints and stuff like that on the bone parts of his wings. But then again, I had to redo the depth and shadow in a lot of places where the oil paints were supposed to be, but were too removed. And so that was like a back and forth of trying to get it right. The undercoating for the wings really served as a guiding line for what to do and what to paint. And so I had to really go over that a lot back and forth in order to make it look decent. In the end, the wings are actually really good. They're a good highlight of the model. Now the Death Guard armor, the armor itself, it actually looks great. I like the bleached bone white and the dark green shoulder pads. They turned out great. The brass on him and his shoulder pads look great. His skin it's okay. It's Plague Bearer-ish. It's greenish. Because I was going with the clean box look for a bit generic. There's a lot less color on his skin than I would normally like. I practiced some color blending where you basically take a paint, water it down heavily, and just do layers of it until it transitions from one color to another on his right arm, where it transitions to his green skin and horns and stuff like that. The rusted chains and his claws and stuff, that effect turned out really well. It's like there you can see the metallic stuff on the chains and stuff. It's still rusted and stuff like that, but you can still see it. The sword was a good start. I probably didn't take the highlights further than I should have. His base is okay. Bases are the one thing that keeps eluding me because they're always an afterthought, and by the time like I get to them, I'm like done. This model's like, I'm done, I don't care anymore kind of stuff, so they get like the back end of all my inspiration and effort. His face looks okay. A lot of things turned out well, but I just feel like somewhat frustrated with the painting process, essentially. Overall, he looks cool. He's sitting right next to me in real life as I record this, and it looks pretty cool. The model kit in itself is actually very good. Because there's Zinch, there's Slanesh, there's Korn, there's the Fantasy, there's without wings. I don't know why you do it. I did try to magnetize him, but I did not have the tools to be able to do it, especially for his wings. I didn't have the tools to be able to properly magnetize him with the magnets that I had and the tools to basically dig into the model. They couldn't properly fit, the magnetism wasn't strong enough, because just the way the model is built, it's pretty hollow, so had a lot of trouble there. Apart from that, it's overall a good model. It could easily be a 9 out of 10, but it's just some things frustrated me. Just like back and forth. And so overall I'm going to say an 8 out of 10, just almost a 9. But, yeah, overall, pretty cool. Alright, moving on to other things. So, probably wondering why I've been gone for so long. Well, interesting thing, I found a way to poison myself, and that took me out. The simple explanation is, have you ever seen Avatar: The Last Airbender? When Uncle Iroh is debating whether or not this plant is a delicious tea or a deadly poison? Pretty much I did the same thing, except I was like, is this water good or is it completely full of toxin? And by the second glass I realized that it was completely toxic, and I was out for 2 weeks. I've never been so sick in my life. So if you think something is toxic, please do not drink it. And no, I am not in Ohio right now, for those who may be wondering. Alright, so back to painting. I am mostly healed, because painting takes a lot of focus and energy to think, surprisingly, when you're painting things so minute. So yeah, Angron is next. And like the video if you like the video, comment if you want to comment, and share it if you want to share it, and I'll be back. Who knows? Who knows how long Angron's going to take? Goodness.